Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo used his first major policy address to threaten Iran with the strongest sanctions in history.
The Iranian regime should know that this is just the beginning. This sting of sanctions will be painful if the regime does not change its course from the unacceptable and unproductive path it has chosen to one that rejoins the League of Nations. These will indeed end up being the strongest sanctions in history.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech at the Heritage Foundation comes after the Trump administration withdrew the United States from the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement. Pompeo also warned European companies not to expect to be exempt from newly reinstated sanctions. Last week, the French oil company Total announced it's canceling its planned contracts with Iran following the U.S. decision to pull out of the nuclear agreement. We'll have more on Pompeo's speech after headlines. President Trump is meeting with South Korean leader Moon Jae-in today at the White House as the upcoming U.S.-North Korea summit appears increasingly imperiled. On Monday, the Trump administration again threatened the U.S. could pursue the so-called Libya model if North Korea does not cooperate. In 2003, Libya negotiated sanctions relief from the United States in exchange for renouncing its nuclear program and welcoming international inspectors to verify the disarmament. 8 years later, Muammar Gaddafi was dragged through the streets and publicly killed by U.S.-backed rebels after the U.S. and its allies intervened in a massive bombing campaign. This is Fox News' Martha McCallum interviewing Vice President Mike Pence Monday.
You know, there was some talk about the Libyan model last week. And, you know, as the president made clear, you know, this will only end like the Libyan model ended if Kim Jong-un doesn't make a deal.
Some people saw that as a threat.
Well, I think it's more of a fact.
President Trump met with FBI Director Christopher Wray, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and the Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats in the Oval Office Monday. The meeting came only a day after President Trump demanded via Twitter that the Justice Department probe Trump's claims that his campaign had been surveilled. Trump's been claiming for months without evidence the Obama administration spied on his campaign. Legal experts say Trump's tweet Sunday crossed a line by applying overt presidential pressure on the Justice Department, potentially setting up a clash similar to the one between President Nixon and the Justice Department during the Watergate scandal. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has asked the Justice Department's Inspector General to probe the allegations of surveillance. Gina Haspel was sworn in as CIA director Monday after being confirmed by the Senate, despite concern about her role in the post-9/11 CIA torture program. Haspel is a 33-year CIA veteran who is responsible for running a secret CIA black site in Thailand in 2002, where at least one prisoner was waterboarded and tortured in other ways during her tenure. Haspel also oversaw the destruction of videotape showing torture at the black site. She was confirmed after a number of Democratic senators joined with their Republican counterparts to support her. In a major blow to workers' rights, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 Monday. Employers can use arbitration clauses to prohibit workers from banding together to challenge violations of federal labor laws and class action lawsuits. The decision could affect up to 25 million employment contracts. In her dissent, which was longer than the majority opinion, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg called the majority's decision egregiously wrong and said it will lead to a, quote, huge under-enforcement of federal and state statutes designed to advance the well-being of vulnerable workers, unquote. Justice Neil Gorsuch sided with the Supreme Court's 4 conservative justices, giving them the 5-4 majority. In financial news, the Federal Reserve and banking regulators are slated to roll back the VOLCKER rule, a key financial regulation enacted after the 2008 financial crisis. The rule bars banks from using customers' deposits to make the bank's own risky bets. It was one of the key aspects of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act and was named after former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. Watering down the rule would allow Wall Wall Street's giant banks to again engage in a wide range of risky trading using customers' own money. Meanwhile, on Monday, President Trump nullified rules aimed at preventing discrimination in auto lending. And today, the House is slated to vote on legislation that would roll back other parts of the Dodd-Frank Act for thousands of smaller to mid-sized banks. The United States and China have agreed to hold further talks about trade and exports as the world's two largest economies step back from the brink of a global trade war. Over the weekend, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said the threatened trade war would be put on hold, backing the U.S. away from imposing tariffs on $50 billion of China's exports to the United States, while China appears to have committed to importing more energy and agricultural commodities from the United States. On Hawaii's Big Island, the Kilauea volcano is continuing to erupt, spewing plumes of ash and lava. Workers are rushing to shut down a nearby geothermal power plant to prevent the uncontrollable release of toxic gases from the site. Lava is flowing increasingly close to the Pua Geothermal Venture Plant, which provides 25% of the Big Island's energy. In Oakland, California, hundreds of people turned out for a massive picnic and protest celebration dubbed BBQing While Black on Sunday. The community event at Lake Merritt was organized after a white woman harassed and called the police on two African-American men for grilling in the same location a few weeks earlier. The incident sparked massive outrage in Oakland, where gentrification has displaced many longtime African-American residents. In Georgia, voters are heading to the polls today for the state's primary elections. In the governor's race, former State House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams is facing off against former State Representative Stacey Evans. If Abrams wins today's Democratic primary and then wins in November, she'll become the nation's first African-American female governor. African-American activist Lucy McBath, the mother of Jordan Davis, is also running for a congressional seat to represent Atlanta's northern suburbs. In 2012, Lucy McBath's 17-year-old son, Jordan Davis, was shot dead and killed by a middle-aged white man in a dispute over loud music, sparking nationwide protests. And lawyer and civil rights pioneer Dovey Johnson Roundtree has died at the age of 104. Throughout her legal career, Roundtree shattered gender and racial barriers and successfully challenged Jim Crow laws and segregation. She was also among the first black women to train as an officer in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and among the first women to be ordained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is Dovey Johnson Roundtree speaking about her experience working for then NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall in preparations for Brown v. Board of Education. Thurgood Marshall would go on to become the first African-American Supreme Court justice.
We were always looking for the pattern. Where are we going? Can we go there? Why can't we go now? And sometimes the answer was, well, we've got to wait for this theory to be exhausted and get to the Supreme Court. We've got to wait for that. So there's a lot of things that went into the pattern of getting it to the Supreme Court. So you get some reading of how courts in between would be reacting to the theory, say, of non-discrimination in education. See, that didn't just happen. You had to come up a long way through a number of states to get it right, that when they'd hit the Supreme Court, they just had only one question that they needed to be answered. Because courts, you know, like to deviate, go down here and stay 10 years, you know. Let a lot of heads get beat over and a lot of loss be sustained. But that's the way the legal system is.
That was Dovey Johnson Roundtree. She died on Monday at the age of 104. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.